All right, let's dive right into this fascinating text. Today in this explainer, we're unpacking a really dense, incredibly provocative document that completely redefines our fundamental understanding of human speech. We're moving words away from being just a simple tool for communication and exploring them as an actual, physical force of nature. It's an exploration that bridges deep spiritual traditions with visceral, physical reactions, and I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this material.
So we need to start by breaking down a basic assumption. Usually, we think of words simply as a way to transfer information, from one brain to another through our ears. But the text asks us to reconsider this entirely. It points out that the sheer roar of thunder can literally split tall buildings wide open. And it poses a really interesting question. If raw sound can cause such massive structural destruction, what is the true hidden potential of the words we speak every single day? The author insists that words aren't just air. They are tightly coiled springs of kinetic energy, just waiting to be released.
To really understand this, the text contrasts modern aviation noise with the careful arrangement of mantras. Think about it. Our modern, mechanical civilization produces a tremendous amount of chaotic noise. Imagine massive, fast-moving jet airplanes tearing through the sky. This unorganized noise creates harmful reactions and invisible damage everywhere it reaches. But then, the source flips the script and looks at ancient mantras. When words are carefully selected, woven together in a highly specific sequence, and recited with a continuous rhythm, they do the exact opposite of that chaotic mechanical noise. They generate a highly focused, specialized level of constructive energy.
Okay, let's move on to Section 1, the physics of sound.
The text leans heavily into the actual physics of continuous friction here, and it gives a very grounded example. If an elephant constantly rubs its body against a tree, that continuous physical friction generates an immense amount of localized heat in a very short time. Well, the text claims this exact same principle applies to audio frequencies. It argues that if a specific audible sound is kept continuously active and directed, it can actually generate enough physical heat to boil water. No way, right? But it's all about the continuous, unbroken flow of energy, creating a compounding physical effect.
So how does this work in practice? It's essentially a four-step process, where continuously flowing sound waves shape the mind, modifying our internal psychological conditions and our surrounding environment. It starts with thought initiation, connecting a specific emotion to a word. Then comes the rhythmic repetition of that word in a set sequence, at a set speed, with a set tone. By maintaining this continuous flow, the thought basically hijacks the brain's processing center. The text explains that this constant auditory and mental friction not only stimulates the physical body, but effectively overwrites negative psychological conditions, replacing them with a completely modified, highly focused mental state.
Which brings us to Section 2, the magnetism of rituals and faith.
Now, you might look at things like a seat, a rosary, or sandalwood, and think of them purely as cultural traditions. But the source insists these aren't just empty props. The text treats them as vital scientific instruments for the process. Take bathwater, for example. It's not just for physical cleaning. Specific incantations invoke the water deity, Varuna. The text argues that this process of invocation fundamentally alters the physical components. It turns ordinary elements into powerful, magnetized conduits that lock the practitioner's faith into place and prepare them for what is to come.
And this leads to a crucial quote from the source: "One must become divine to worship the divine." The whole point of the rituals, the cleansing, and the breathwork is completely purifying both the physical body and the deeper, unseen spiritual layer, which the text refers to as the causal body. You simply cannot interact with this level of high-frequency power in a baseline human state. By utilizing those carefully prepared tools, the practitioner is essentially upgrading their physical and causal hardware. They are transforming their own body and mind into a divine vessel, which is an absolute prerequisite before they can trigger the true power of the sound sequence.
Let's move to Section 3, Sphota, the atomic explosion of words.
Okay, let's really take a second to unpack this, because this is the climax of the entire text. Sphota. It's described as an explosive phenomenon. When the continuous repetition of sound meets that deeply magnetized faith we just talked about, a massive reaction occurs. The text explains that this isn't just a mental realization, it is a literal acoustic and psychological detonation. The subtle senses perceive an intense inner glow, a surge of profound realization, and physical signs of victory and joy. Furthermore, the source claims this explosion generates sound wave frequencies that completely surpass the limits of normal human hearing.
To really grasp Sphota, the author uses a brilliant comparison. Just as atomic fission uses its environment to create a devastating chain reaction, a mantra uses focused faith to trigger an exponential explosion of consciousness. Think about atomic fission. The initial splitting of the atom is actually quite small, but it immediately uses the surrounding environment to multiply its energy into something terrifyingly powerful. The text draws a direct parallel here. The initial spoken word of the mantra is the splitting of the atom, but the environment it uses to multiply, the fuel for its chain reaction, is the practitioner's deeply cultivated faith and the ritualistic atmosphere, turning a tiny sound into an unstoppable surge of energy.
And that takes us to Section 4, Mantric versus Yogi, and the elements of power.
The text takes a pretty surprising turn here by making a bold distinction between two well-known spiritual paths. According to the source, a yogi is primarily a worshipper of the air element, or vayu, mastering life force energy through breath control. However, a mantric, the practitioner of sound, operates on the element of space, or akash, because sound actually requires space to travel. And here is where it gets really interesting, because the mantric manipulates the foundational element of space through the explosive power of sound. The text claims a true mantric is entirely equal to, and in some cases even more powerful than, a traditional yogi.
When you put all this together, think of the process like a tiny seed transforming into a massive tree. You start with the initial word. It definitely has energy, but it's small. But then, when you introduce the magnetism of the practitioner's faith in those prepared tools, it starts drawing in power and compounding it. Finally, you reach Sphota. Because of that multiplying factor, that initial tiny seed of sound erupts into a towering, exponentially large surge of acoustic and psychological energy.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this? Well, it's that our words carry a weight far heavier than we usually realize. The text we've explored today challenges us to view our speech not just as passing air, but as continuous friction, as atomic seeds, and as potential explosions of energy that literally shape our minds and our environment. So knowing the explosive physical and psychological energy of sound, how will you use your words today? Will they be chaotic noise or highly focused constructive energy? It's a fascinating paradigm shift to consider. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today, and keep questioning the world around you.